Hey everyone, and welcome into Pushing the Limits. Today I have Dr. Stephanie Venn Watson to guest, and Stephanie is a repeat guest on the show. I had her on about a year ago, I think, and we're talking about something called C15. Now, this is an essential fatty acid. It's the first one to be discovered in 90 years, and most of us are deficient in it due to our foods that we eat nowadays and our environments, etc. And we dive into the backstory, a really interesting backstory, because Stephanie used to work with the Navy Dolphins in America. Believe it or not, they've got a pod of dolphins that they have. And that's where they discovered that the C15 deficiency was aging the dolphins quicker. And then they correlated that with human research as well and came across that this was really something groundbreaking. And since then, there's been over 15 years odd of research. So really interesting, really important longevity molecule. This is one you want to know about. It's called Fatty 15. If after listening to the episode you want to get some, make sure you head over to fatty15.com. That's the numbers 15.com. And you can use my code that the guys have kindly set me up with, and it's Lisa T, all capitals, LASAT, and you'll get 15% off. So that's a real bonus for listening to this episode, and it's the sort of thing you probably want to stay on for life. So make sure you listen to this, check it out. It has so many implications for health. It's not funny. So really excited to bring you this research. They've just published on the cellular fragility syndrome. This is what happens to us when we don't have enough C15 basically in our diet. So really, really important stuff for many, many ailments. So make sure you check this episode out. And before we head over to the show, if you want to support the show and keep us on air and help the team behind the scenes, and it costs a lot of resources, a lot of time, a lot of energy to do this, to bring you all of this cutting edge sort of research, then you can go to patreon.com, Patreon, Patreon.com /Lisa T, and you can make a small donation there or a monthly contribution for the price of a cup of coffee or something like that. That would be hugely appreciated. And if you're looking for the latest in cutting edge longevity supplements and what's available down here in New Zealand instead of just in the States that you hear all these amazing things, then check out what I've done. I've curated a huge range of supplements. I work with over 24 brands now. We bring them into New Zealand and for Australians as well, obviously, and get you access to some of these brilliant supplements down here, down under. So make sure you check that out at lisatamati.com. Right, over to the show now with Dr. Stephanie Venn Watson. Well, hey everyone, welcome into Pushing the Limits. Today I have a wonderful lady for you who is Dr. Stephanie Venn Watson. Welcome to the show, Stephanie. It's fabulous to have you here.
Oh, Lisa, it's wonderful to be here.
Yeah, and you're a repeat offender on the show, but we had a bit of a drama in the middle of the last interview, didn't we? When Mum ended up having a medical emergency and I had to literally drop the mic and run. But I'm very keen to dive deeper into something called Fatty 15 or C15 we're going to be talking about today, people. And this is an essential fatty acid. And it's the first one that's been discovered in 90 years. We know that omega-3s and omega-6s have been classified as essential fatty acids, but this is a new kid on the block. And Dr. Stephanie is the woman behind this, and her husband, Eric, who's just taken the dog out. So Stephanie, before we dive into the whole story, for those who didn't listen to the first interview, and I will put the link to the show note in the show notes below, but give us a little bit of a background on first where you came from, how you discovered C15, and well, you didn't discover C15, but you discovered its importance, if you like, and your work with the Navy Dolphins, because that's such a fabulous story.
Yeah, absolutely. So Lisa, I'm a veterinary epidemiologist, so which means I'm a veterinarian who specializes in tracking diseases across all different animals, including humans, and was working for the Centers for Disease Control and the World Health Organization, helping to set up infectious disease surveillance systems all over the world. And then about 20 years ago, now more than 20 years ago, was invited by the Navy to help start and lead a program to continually improve the health and welfare of Navy dolphins, which I didn't know the Navy had dolphins,
No.
and and to be honest, I didn't know how I'd feel about baby dolphins, and went down to the center in San Diego, saw that the dolphins, the Navy has cared for this population of about 100 bottlenose dolphins for over 60 years.
Wow.
They go out into the open ocean every day. Every day they choose to come back. They live longer. So if you talk about dolphins in the wild, they live to about 20. Dolphins at the Navy are routinely living 40, 50, and even now getting close to 60 years
Wow.
old.
Wow. Healthy dolphin.
So, oh, it's pretty amazing. So because they were getting this increasing population of really geriatric dolphins, that's when we started seeing that older dolphins, which are large brain, long-lived mammals, that they were developing, some of them were developing similar diseases as us as we go old. So chronic inflammation, high cholesterol, fatty liver disease, even the full suite of changes consistent with Alzheimer's. So Lisa, that really opened up this really amazing world where we were able to reach out to the world's experts in these diseases in humans and be able to ask, well, what are you doing? Like, how are you helping people that are getting older with these diseases? And a lot of them were coming back with, well, we don't actually have very effective treatments. So we had the gift of being able to use this advanced technology called metabolomics.
Yeah.
That
Wow.
allowed us, right, to look at thousands of small molecules present in both the dolphins' all fish diets as well as their blood over long periods of time. And that's where we found which small molecules predicted the healthiest aging dolphins. We thought it would be omega-3s because all they eat
They
are
eat
fish.
fish.
And lo and behold, omega-3s didn't even make the list, Lisa. And like we talked about before, what was at the top of the list of the healthiest aging molecule was C15, also known as pentadecanoic acid.
Pentadecanoic acid. That's a mouthful. So we'll call it C15.
I like that too.
and so these fish, these dolphins, sorry, you had two populations, I believe, and one were getting more of a high fat candlefish sort of a diet. And then when the Navy changed their diet because they couldn't get these candlefish anymore because of, I don't know, overfishing or environmental issues, I believe, they couldn't get this special fish with high C15 in it. That's when you started to notice an acceleration in their aging. Is that correct?
That is right. And so there, as the diet changed, exactly like you said, Lisa, and this is over a period of, 5-10 years, we started seeing conditions popping up in some of the dolphins, like fatty liver disease. And again, these were among dolphins that were allowed to live long enough to develop these conditions,
Right.
but popping up in ways that that were coincidentally being popping up in human populations too. And this is where, once we started publishing these papers of showing that higher C15 is associated with a lower risk of this set of, like insulin resistance, metabolic syndrome, iron overload, same studies were coming out in humans showing that people who have higher C15 have a lower risk of developing type 2 diabetes, heart disease, and fatty liver disease. So we have this a coincidence in which at the same time the dolphins were getting less C15 through their fish, we were getting less C15 through our primary source, which is dairy fat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we've changed our diet. I mean, one of the things that's happened in the last 100 years, or especially in the last 10, 20 years, like firstly, fat was sort of demonized and it was all sort of thrown in together. Saturated fats are all bad, right? Which was very wrong. But we've sort of tended to go away from full fat dairy, and then we've also pasteurized our dairy, and I don't know whether that has an effect on the levels of C15, but we've also changed the diet of our cows, not so much in New Zealand because we're still grass fed mostly over here. But all of these things mean that the human population has had a decrease in their C15 levels. Is that correct?
That's absolutely true. So as we are multiple factors that you helped bring up, Lisa. So, as we move away from whole fat milk, so non-fat milk has half the amount of C15, non-fat milk has no C15, plant-based milks have no C15 in them. And then, like you said, depending upon what cows are fed, if they're fed corn, they have half as much C15 than if they're fed grass. And interestingly, a recent study showing that the higher the altitude, the grass, that an animal eats, a cow eats, the higher their C15 levels. So
Wow,
even
that's
the altitude of the grass can influence C15 levels in our dairy fat.
wow. Well, that just reminds me, we were just bringing out a formulation ourselves, and it's got carnosic acid from rosemary extract. And New Zealand's rosemary extracts are particularly potent because of that ozone layer here. So it seems to be when plants are struggling, they seem to produce more of the good stuff for some reason.
Yeah, that's right. It's
Yeah,
like
random.
evolve survivability. That
Exactly. Yeah, it's a random story for you, but there you go. So that would make sense. So so we've decreased our dairy, and we're seeing an avalanche in the human population of. I mean, we've got an aging population for starters, so we need to do something about that. But we're also starting to see accelerated aging in our children and our young people, who are starting to get age-related diseases, things like NAFLD, like fatty liver disease and metabolic syndromes and diabetes and things in our young populations, in our young children even. And we need to be tackling this because it's a huge problem that's coming at us, let alone that we've got an aging population who are also experiencing metabolic disease. I mean, I think I know the American stats are something like, only 7% of people are actually metabolically healthy in America. And I dare say it's not much different down here. And that we have, metabolic disorders and so on going on. So is fatty 15 going to be, or the C15 going to be something that is, powerful in this problem that we're facing as a society, or a worldwide problem?
We think so. So
Yeah.
with regards to, it's really been now about a decade of science, or really 12 years of science that's been building up to a paper we published recently. And before I get that, before I forget, you talked about different ways of why C15 is declining. Another factor is age. So as we get older, our C15 levels decline, even regardless of what it is that we're eating. So just like you said, we have these compounding issues of, as we get older, C15 levels. And then on the front end with children, getting less C15 from the diet. This includes mom's milk. So if mom has low C15, her milk has lower C15, and infant formulas have no C15 in them. So we're kind of having these two hits. So to first set the stage with these C15 deficiencies, what paper we just published, recently published in the journal Metabolites, is what we call the cell fragility syndrome. And what this is showing, again, the culmination of 10 years of research, that the lower, as our C15 levels reach a critical threshold, and if we get below that amount, which is 0.2% of C15 in our cell membranes, our cells become fragile. And that fragility accelerates aging and helps explain why people who have lower levels of C15 have a higher risk of developing type 2 diabetes, fatty liver disease, and heart disease. And in fact, in 2012, the same year that we discovered, this syndrome and combination of conditions in dolphins, in 2012, there were some scientists at Columbia University who discovered an entirely new way that our cells were dying, Lisa.
Wow.
And they called it ferroptosis. So
yeah.
so prior to this discovery, when we went to cell biology class, we were always taught there were 3 ways that our cells die, right? Yep. It was like apoptosis, necrosis, and autophagy. That's it. It is. In 2012, the scientists discover a 4th way. And it was very specific. And the way they described it was that it was fragile cell membranes that led to lipid peroxidation, so increased oxidative stress in the cell. It was then combining with this mysterious free iron that was showing up in the cells that they couldn't explain. And when lipid peroxidation combines with this free iron, that led to this massive production of reactive oxygen species that basically took out our mitochondria. So our powerhouses of our cells died. Whole new form of cell death. So and then since that paper, there have been over 10,000 peer-reviewed papers on ferroptosis. What nobody's been able to answer is, why did ferroptosis show up? Why does it cause, and we know what it causes, accelerated aging, increased risk of these chronic diseases, but nobody could figure out why did it show up all of a sudden. Yeah, so
Mm.
our paper basically sets the stage and shows the evidence that this coincided with when we started taking C15 out of our diet, and that nutritional C15 deficiencies, this syndrome called cellular fragility syndrome, is the cause of
Wow.
ferroptosis. So
Wow.
yeah, crazy exciting research, mainly because it's fixable.
Yeah, we can just put C15 back in our diet, and we'll get into that in a minute, how we can do that. But this is, I was aware of ferroptosis from the cancer side of that story. So, I studied ferroptosis where we actually try to use ferroptosis to kill the cancer cells, right? Which is problematic, and it's not as straightforward. And, it has its downsides because you don't want ferroptosis happening in the other cells, right? But the cellular the fragility syndrome. So basically, if we have sturdy, not oxidizable fats in our membranes, that makes our membranes much more stable and able to let in the good things and not let in the bad things. Is that like a very layman's way of putting it? Like, is that sort
I'm
of
I'm I'm ready to put that in a box, and you got it. We're done. Yeah,
so,
perfectly described. Great.
yeah, because I mean, I've been fascinated with membranes for a while because I've been studying things like plasmalogens, which are very interesting also. And and when we have things like bad fats, like trans fats and oxidized fats, even fish oils, because fish oils has been an interesting one, right? We've had all this amazing research on how good omega-3s are for our heart and our cardiovascular and our brain and all of this sort of stuff, but then there were some studies that showed that it wasn't beneficial. And from what I've read, and you may be able to tell me more, of course, but it's because some of the studies used oxidized omega-3s, and this is the problem with omega-3s, is that they oxidize very easily because they have these double bonds, and that's not the case. Can you explain that a little bit with C15, why it's a sturdy, sort of a straightforward dude?
Right, yeah, it's exactly what it is. And nature, go nature, right? So nature has it's amazing how specific it uses these molecules. So we talk about, like you had mentioned, with unsaturated and polyunsaturated fatty acids like omega-3s, omega-6s, they have benefits because they're flexible fatty acids, but their weak point is that they have these double bonds that then allow the molecule to bend, but it also makes them susceptible to getting attacked by oxygen and undergoing what you just said, oxidative stress. Our cells weaken, they break down, especially as we age. So C15 is in this, it's like this Goldilocks fatty acid where it's a saturated fat, which means that any saturated fat basically means it has no double bonds. So it's just 15 carbons in a straight chain. And therefore, because it is so sturdy and so strong, when it goes into our cell membranes, it really acts like an armor, like bricks in our cell that help keep them stable and help them live, help our cells last longer. But we've been told for most of our lives, right, that all saturated fats are bad.
Yeah, terrible.
We now know there are two different, very distinct forms of saturated fats. They're called even chain and odd chain. C15 is an odd chain fatty acid because it has a number of carbons in it, 15. The even chain saturated fatty acids like C14 and C16, which are present in much higher levels in dairy fat, like 40% of dairy fat are C14, C16, only 1% is C15.
Wow.
Much higher levels of 14 and 16. These are pro-inflammatory saturated fats that continue to be associated with an increased risk of type 2 diabetes, fatty liver disease. So we've got this little Goldilocks essential fatty acid that's tucked into dairy fat. And so, the goal here is like, how do we maximize the use of it so it can stabilize our cell membranes and not have to compete with
and not have the pro-inflammatory effects. And this is gold because like I think most people just think as fat is fat, and maybe they know about polyunsaturated and saturated and the very, very basics. But to understand the oxidization story and the stability of these fats, and that they don't oxidize. The C15 doesn't oxidize, and the odd versus the even. Like, you would think, what's the difference between a C14 and a C15? Really, like, it sounds like nothing, right? And one carbon. But you've really, discovered that this is like everything that's odd is sort of not good, and everything that's even's not good and pro-inflammatory. Would that be why? So, like, with populations who still have a whole, dairy in their diet, are they getting enough C15, or is the pro-inflammatory C14, C16 sort of negating that effect with the C15?
Yeah, it's a great question, right? And it's the $1 million question, because
Right.
it's somewhere in the middle, right? So that the fact that the problems, our metabolic problems, aging rates are getting worse since we've taken C15 out of our diet. And so that does support that that there is an adequate amount of C15 that we can get from our diet, especially as children and in our youngest years, to help set us up for success. The question is, for the next 80 to 100 years of our life, what's our best source of how can we make the best use of C15? And the answer from that, the reason why it's so messy of not just going back to whole dairy fat, is because when you look at studies on dairy fat and health, most of the studies, to be honest, were biased in the wrong direction. They were biased to say that they're bad for us, right? And so really, education has been more around that. In most cases, it's not as bad as we thought. Like, whole dairy fat isn't bad, or it isn't as bad as we thought. So that's starting there. But what we're not finding is that consistently, by eating lots of dairy fat, you have a lower risk of type 2 diabetes, heart disease, and fatty liver
No,
disease.
definitely not. No.
Right. And so that means that we can't just get C15 if we want to optimize the benefit of C15. It's not coming through, just like you said, Lisa, when it's having to compete with these pro-inflammatory fats. So there was a really a cool study that was done by Bishop et al. And they had a mouse model of type 2 diabetes and fatty liver disease. And when the mouse was given C15, mouse got better. So lower glucose, lower insulin, less fat in the liver. When they gave it C17, it got a little bit better, not as much as C15, but it got better. When they gave the mouse whole dairy fat, it got worse. So the liver became inflamed, it got fatty liver disease. So all of this really shows that milk fat is a component of our diet that we shouldn't completely get rid of. But to say that we should be loading ourselves with whole dairy fat to, maximize and optimize our C15 levels, we're probably not going to get those benefits we're hoping for.
Like, if you think about it too, like in our society where we have too much calories, too much empty nutrition. So we've got nutritional deficiencies, but too many calories and too many of the wrong fats and too many of, So if you think about it from that perspective, even if the full fat dairy was great for our grandparents and they had a different environment and their cows were grass fed and all of that sort of thing was part of that equation, but they didn't have like highly palatable, ultra processed food on every street corner 10 times a day, adding to the calorie load, the fat load, the thing, all of that sort of stuff. So if you're wanting to get the C15 out of the fat, you're going to have to, for a start, go back to how our grandparents ate, which would be great, right? And who can do that now? To a large degree, that's difficult even. And so that's another piece of the problem. So it's a bit like with colostrum, and one of the formulations that we have is working with colostrum extracts. So like, we're taking the best out of the colostrum, and colostrum has so many good positive things, but it also has a lot of protein, it has a lot of fat, and protein's great and fat's great, but not when you're trying to get the extract, which is the most potent part of it, right? And we've got different extracts and different types to do different things. And we're making the bioactive, the strong part of it, the story, really, because
Yeah.
we want the powerful bits. We don't want the rest because we've got too much of the other stuff anyway in our diet, right? So it's
Yeah,
a bit like that.
that's exactly it. And there's so there was a group that got together in Copenhagen back in 2017, and they went to address this exact question, right? Which is there are undoubtedly ingredients within dairy fat that when they're used in isolation or in a pure form in the lab, they show remarkable benefits. But those remarkable benefits aren't coming out in studies when you use the whole fat, when you use whole fat diet. So what they concluded was that, in most cases, the best way to get our nutrients is from food. That's in most cases. Dairy fat is an exception. And what they concluded was that for some of these ingredients within dairy fat that have these benefits, they get diluted if they aren't further purified and able to basically do the work. So exactly what you said, Lisa.
Exactly what we're doing in our company.
It's not a trick or a twist. It really is that it's just one of those foods where, and I don't avoid a whole dairy fat. I eat cheese. I still put in my coffee, but I don't get the same benefits from eating those foods as I'm getting from a pure free fatty acid C15. So it's
totally get that, because one of the ingredients that we're using, it's called immune defense protein, and that is like, it takes 10 liters of milk to get 1 gram of this bioactive suite of whey proteins, right? So like you can't drink 10 liters of milk, you wouldn't want to, and we're taking all the rest of it out and just giving you the stuff that really counts. And fatty 15 and C15 is really, so fatty 15 is the supplement form that you guys have brought out. So C15 is a bit like that. We're taking the best, we're taking that Goldilocks one, and we're not getting the rest of it without it. I also heard you say, like, switching gears a little bit, because this one was interesting to me. There's something called PDC, and I've forgotten the whole long word, and it's a cannabinoid, the first cannabinoid activator. Is that correct? The CB1 and CB2. So tell us that story before I get it all upside down and back to front.
That was all spot on. So we discovered a couple of years after we had discovered C15 as an essential fatty acid, we continued the research, and we were able to show that our bodies not only use C15 for all kinds of good things, but our body also uses C15 to make a second molecule or a metabolite called pentadecanoyl carnitine.
That's the one. I couldn't get that out.
Oh no, please don't waste brain space on that. So the short name for it is PDC. And just like you said, Lisa, that it is the second ever discovered full acting endocannabinoid, which means it fully activates both CB1 and CB2, which is crazy. And it helps explain. So when we brought fatty 15 out to the world, we're expecting the long-term metabolic, heart, and liver benefits for it. And that's why we put it out there. But what was interesting is that once fatty 15 started getting out to the world, myself included, that within weeks, we're getting better sleep and calmer mood and less joint pain. And to be honest, I thought this was clearly a placebo effect because it is not the expected activities, knowing that C15 is an AMPK activator and an mTOR inhibitor. Different world, how these effects were. And then we started getting more and more of our customers reliably reporting these same benefits. So about half of our customers report feeling these benefits within 2 weeks. So as we learned about this endocannabinoid, then all of it started really making sense, right? Which is that different people may make this metabolite in different amounts, and some people may be better, their body's better at making the endocannabinoid than others, but that certainly helps explain a near term effect of better sleep, calmer mood,
better mood. Wow.
I mean, this is an endocannabinoid, everything you would expect
So not, you know, so we know from marijuana and things like that, that it's activating that. And that's one of the reasons why people, but there's a reason for these receptors to be in the body, and it's not really from marijuana per se, you know, like, and the pain relief and things like that, are very, very real, you know, and even from marijuana, you know, we know that these have benefits. There's another one, another random thing, palmitoyl, how's it called? Palmitoyl ethanolamide.
Yeah, PEA.
PEA, which I use a lot in the clinic, and I still can't get it out. I just called it PEA. That's also a CB1 and CB2 activator. And so has analgesic effects as well as lots of digestive benefits as well. So, you know, I use it for both of those sorts of things in my clinic, but I wasn't aware that C15 does that as well. So that was a real eye-opener, because you know, like, how many of us are dealing with joint pain, and how many of us are dealing with, you know, pain in general, and sleep and menopause, and you and I are going through menopause. It's like, yeah, you know, there's a good reason to take it.
Yeah, and then, you know, as I'm sure we had, you know, discussed that, you know, with menopause, that is the time when, you know, it's massive acceleration of aging for us as the estrogen drops. So while men feel the onset of aging at an earlier age, you know, we hit that menopause wall, and then we catch up real fast to that aging.
Heart attacks and all of the rest of it that
Right.
go with it.
All the things that come with it. And that's when, for me, that's when things like joint pain started kicking in. Like, you know, I was getting tennis elbow, and I don't even play tennis, right? So all those things are very real to kick in. And for me, Fatty 15 was able to completely alleviate the joint pain. And as far as supporting sleep, I used to wander the halls at night between 2 to 4 in the mornings. And you know, that's taking care of that. So it's nice to see that there's these, we call them delights and surprises. We still want to see, you know, there's still clinical trials and things that need to be done, but we definitely have this mechanism of action that shows a very reliable feedback we've had. And also want to share, we had a clinical trial results just came out last week, Lisa, of a double-blinded controlled, placebo-controlled clinical trial with Fatty 15. That was independently led by Dr. Jeff Schwimmer, who is a leader in fatty liver disease in kids. And what he showed was that Fatty 15 successfully raised C15 levels up and above this nutritional deficiency disorder. And for the people who got their levels above a nutritional deficiency, we saw successful decreases in their liver enzymes, as improved red blood cell health. So the cellular strengthening component. So really excited to see repeated results coming from all angles, epidemiological, you know, studies in the lab, and now clinical trials.
Yeah, and that's, you know, to see it in children, happening in children, is just absolutely terrifying, you know, when you think about what their future holds when they're aging, basically at the rate of what we are in our 50s, you know, like that shouldn't be happening, you know, that shouldn't be happening.
Yeah, and that's why Jeff, you know, Dr. Schwimmer, it just says, you know, when you ask him is, you know, do you feel like your kids have accelerated aging? And I wasn't even able to finish asking the question. He said, unquestionably, these kids are aging faster. And he said they're getting the diseases of their grandparents before their parents.
Yeah.
So this is just really, and if we have, you know, and again, from Jeff's standpoint, because he's been pursuing the C15 hypothesis alongside us for 10 years.
Wow.
You know, he, you know, his part is, gosh, this is so devastating. And if this is one way to help fix this growing issue, fatty liver disease now present in 1 in 10 children, 1 in 3 people globally, then we really need to be moving forward, increase awareness as fast as possible to help, you know, fix this component of the problem.
Absolutely, because NAFLD, the fatty liver disease, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, is just absolutely like 1 in 3, as you said. It's huge problem that a lot of people don't even know that they've got an issue. I remember interviewing a few weeks ago Dr. Barry Tan, and he's a tocotrienol, which is a type of vitamin E, and he's got some research on NAFLD as well. And it's another fat that's in the membrane, it just starts to, make the story really, I mean, I'm just putting two and two together, having interviewed you both and going, that's interesting. We've got both of those in our supplement regime. So we definitely don't have problems with our liver, which is great. And so let's just go through a list of the things that it is. So because we've sort of scattered them a little bit here and there. So obviously fatty liver disease, type 2 diabetes, metabolic syndrome, iron overload. Can you go in a little bit to the iron story of this? We talked a little bit about ferroptosis, but why is too much iron a bad thing in the body? And
Right.
what's happening there?
And that's new news for a lot of people, right? Because we're
Yeah,
used to hearing
totally.
about
Yeah,
iron deficiency
yeah,
and iron deficiency anemia, which is very real.
yeah,
So
yeah.
for
Especially for
major,
ladies.
exactly. Do not ignore the iron deficiency anemia and the importance of addressing that.
Yeah.
What has been increasing along with this metabolic syndrome and type 2 diabetes of all of these different conditions is a condition called dysmetabolic iron overload syndrome, or DIOS for short. We first really became interested in this condition because it became very clear that this is specifically what the dolphins were getting. And because the dolphins, humans are really complicated. We have different genes, different environmental factors, different diets. We have a very
Can't control us.
we are not well controlled. So the dolphins really were really a fascinating patient population that we were helping that was extraordinarily clean. Because, like we mentioned, all they eat are fish. They all get the same health care. They're all same socioeconomic status. So we're getting even ground for understanding this syndrome in the dolphins, which then ended up being a C15 deficiency syndrome. Where the iron came into it is that when we talked about our cell membranes, the importance of cell membranes being stable, and the role of C15 in stabilizing our cell membranes. This includes our red blood cells. So when our red blood cells don't have enough C15, they, again, less than 0.2% of total fatty acids are C15. When they have low levels of C15, our cells, including our red blood cells, get fragile. So our body, specifically cells in our liver called Kupffer cells, are specialized to take out fragile red blood cells. So one of their jobs is to say, fragile red blood cell, you're not going to be doing good for the body. I'm going to engulf you, take you out of the system, and I'm going to recycle the iron, and I'm going to put it back out into the body. So when we are in a normal state, that is a good thing. When we have a C15 deficiency and we have lots of fragile red blood cells, and when we get old, the same thing happens, a lot of fragile red blood cells. What happens is we end up engulfing a lot of red blood cells into our liver. And what happens is there's so many red blood cells being taken in by our liver that the corpses of those cells, what's left behind is iron.
Right.
And the iron isn't able to get recycled. It's now building up in the tissues of the liver. That's now driving inflammation, oxidative stress, ferroptosis in the liver, and that's where it starts. Once it gets to a certain point, and again, this takes a decade, this takes many years, it builds up in the liver, and then that iron and ferroptosis starts spilling over into the blood, and then it starts seeding our heart, our brains, our pancreas, and that then has impact on our cognitive health, our heart health, and diabetes. So, and that's the very specific phenotype, the only phenotype dolphins get. And then we were able to fix this just by restoring their C15 levels and able to show that in the lab as well. So again, providing so much hope. And it's not that every person who has heart disease or iron overload or fatty liver disease every person has this syndrome, but we think that as many as 1 in 3 people do have a component of the syndrome. And something that's very safe, that is good for, for healthcare practitioners like yourself, where you're helping, let's get this on board and let's take that edge off.
And my brain goes to things like hemochromatosis. Has it got a role to play in that?
Absolutely.
It could,
Yeah. One of the first things that we saw in the dolphins were that we were seeing elevated liver enzymes pop up. So it's only showing up in their blood. We'd see elevated liver enzymes. That's an indication that something's happening in the liver. We rolled out viral infections and parasites and kind of your standard list. And once we started looking into the tissues of past dolphins, that's where we started seeing hemochromatosis, that we were seeing iron deposition in the liver.
Wow.
And then we're like, well, where's that coming from? So again, it ended up being a decade of studies that is all, thanks to University of Columbia and Dr. Jeff Schwimmer, like the world really coming together to be like, oh, here's a big part of what's happening. So it's different than hereditary hemochromatosis, which is people who have a gene mutation where they absorb too much iron through their gut. So this C15 is not expected to help.
It's not. Okay.
But if it's non-hereditary hemochromatosis, so it's not explained by this gene mutation, then that type of hemochromatosis C15 is
that's it. That's a bit of a shame. That'd have been good if it had fixed that as well. The other thing is that viruses and viruses that stay latent in the body use a lot of iron, and so iron is this double-edged sword. I interviewed Dr. Thomas Levy, who's a brilliant cardiologist and author of 13 books, an attorney, amazing man, and he was talking about iron is one of those essential nutrients that's also toxic. As soon as you go over the threshold sort of thing, it's doing bad things in your body. And I'm like, but how does that work? And we need iron for our blood cells, and we women, especially with their periods and things, we're losing iron. But he said never replace iron unless you are definitively anemic and iron deficient, because it has this downside. It feeds is it just viruses, I think, or viruses and bacteria, I'm not sure, but it actually propagates them and helps them survive. And so by not having that, so is that part of that story as well? Like if, for viral side of things, or have you explored that?
We haven't explored that as much. It's a really good point with regard to feeding the viral infections. We know that it's, if you're sitting on iron overload as well, clearly giving iron is going to make that worse. And what becomes really confusing is that a person can have iron deficiency anemia and have tissue iron overload. And that's because when you have these weak red blood cells, they get engulfed by the liver. It's actually pulling iron into the tissues, creating a relative lower amount in the plasma. So the worst case situation, right, would be if a person has iron deficiency anemia, which is being treated with iron, and all that's doing is feeding more iron into those tissues. So being able to do iron panels like ferritin, that if a person has high ferritin, called hyperferritinemia, and it's not caused just by inflammation, that is a great indicator of there's just too much iron in the tissues, and getting at least exactly what you're saying, where you have to be really careful about using iron to make sure that it's not feeding both from a great point, which I hadn't even thought of viral infections, but also if there is an underlying iron overload.
Wow. So it's very, very complicated, but there's also a piece on the cancer story there too, because iron, you don't give iron to someone who's, got an active cancer case either, unless you've got a huge blood loss or something like that going on, but otherwise you don't. Because of again, it's playing into the hands of cancer. So it's one of those.
Everything loves iron. So
so it's good for the good things, but not so good for the other things. So, but taking C15 would help deal with that iron overload in the liver, and sort of help stabilize. Won't fix hemochromatosis from a genetic perspective if it's from that, but it would help perhaps with the viruses, and maybe that's an avenue of study, like whether these latent viruses would be starved of their cancer if we've got C15 on board. Who knows?
It's a great point. And so in being able to fix the underlying cause of iron deposition in the tissues. One thing we found with the dolphins, and I expect the same to be true in people, is that once that iron deposition is there in the tissues, that C15, fatty 15, isn't going to help extract the iron. It's going to help prevent it from adding more. So with the dolphins, we actually found what was really effective was phlebotomy. So where you pull blood, and that's the same treatment that's used for people with iron over. When you pull enough blood out, safe amount of blood out, it actually pulls the iron out of the tissues. So step one is let's get that iron out via there's iron chelators, though phlebotomy, at least in the dolphins, was incredibly effective. And then you can replenish with C15, so you stop the problem from happening. So it's kind of a 1-2 punch that again, pretty easily fixable for something that is affecting a lot of people in the world. So it provides a lot of hope, and it's really safe. So that's an added benefit of being able to get this back in our lives.
Yeah, so even from the genetic hemochromatosis, I'm thinking if you did a combination of that and that, it probably would be at least beneficial, if not, fix the genetic problem, but it would definitely help the re-overload, if you like, once you've had a phlebotomy going. Okay, and now let's look at some of the other things like heart disease, mitochondrial function. That was interesting. So mitochondrial, like we know that mitochondria are at the basis of health, right? When our mitochondria are dysfunctional, like that is the basis of many diseases, if not nearly all of them. And how does C15 support the mitochondria?
It does a couple of things. So its main job is repairing the mitochondria. So as we get older or as we get chronic diseases, the mitochondrial function decreases, and that results in decreased energy production. And when mitochondria really start kind of going downhill, they'll actually stop making energy, and they start making reactive oxygen species. They'll actually have a kind of a kill switch that they'll turn on, and then that takes out the cell. So our mitochondria makes energy using it's called the respiratory chain.
Electron transport. Yeah, electron transport chain. Yeah, that's the one. The four complexes.
Yeah, the four complexes. And in most cases when we age, and they're dependent on each other. So it's complex 1, 2, 3, 4, and energy is made, right? So when we get older, and with most chronic diseases like type 2 diabetes, heart disease, it's that complex 1 that goes down, and then that affects everything else. C15 has a really neat trick of when we metabolize C15, it makes what's called, it helps to make succinate. And succinate can feed straight into complex 2 and allow the rest of the chain to work. So C15 actually creates a workaround to help improve our mitochondrial function, basically repair the system by bypassing the broken part and just saying, we don't need complex 1, we're going to feed right into complex 2, and the mitochondria can keep working. So that's one reason. And then the other way is with regard to this ferroptosis, by stopping the process of ferroptosis, in which the end result of ferroptosis is that these reactive oxygen species take out the mitochondria. The fact that C15 stops that whole process from starting are protecting our mitochondria.
Dysfunction. Well, and that reminds me, because again, I've been quite fascinated by the electron transport chain, and there are a couple of other things like methylene blue, which goes straight to complex 4, and red light therapy, right? The red light therapy in certain nanometers also bypasses those problematic, because mostly it is the problems in the complex 1 and the complex 2 sometimes as well. So by bypassing that, and then you might want to add in, we'll think about red light and methylene blue as part of that if you're dealing with mitochondrial dysfunction. And you might have a triple whammy for energy production, because ATP at the end of the day is what we need to do all of our things, that the cells are doing. And how many people do you know that are dealing with massive fatigue, especially in this post-COVID world that we're living in, right?
It's amazing.
Where everyone's had COVID, and so many are hit with long haul syndrome and energy production, and like the work of Robert Naveau, the cell danger response, the mitochondria there's one switch to turn it off, but it takes three to turn it back on. And basically, these mitochondria not working properly, anything that's going to support mitochondrial function has got to be something that's put on your radar, really. So, and that it circumvents that complex one is really, really interesting. Okay, so what else does this amazing thing do? I've heard you say the word, it's very promiscuous, and I thought that's a brilliant word.
In a great way, right? So
Yeah.
it really is a testament to nature, right? So if you really have an essential fatty acid, of which now there are only 3 known prior to, and this is the 3rd, it's a really rare category of a molecule that our bodies can't make enough of on our own, but really require to maintain our baseline health. And so nature we have evolved for C15 to play many important roles. We've talked about mitochondrial function, stabilizing cell membranes. We talked about, as far as there are different pathways that it triggers that are right in the heart of the longevity pathway, including activating AMPK, inhibiting mTOR. These are the same mechanisms that metformin and rapamycin used for extending longevity. It inhibits HDAC6 and JAK-STAT inhibitors.
Wow.
Again, promiscuous, and in part it's because it's such a simple molecule. It's able to fit and activate a lot of different types of receptors because of its simplicity. So again, nature is incredibly wonderful in its ability to make really good use of saying this one is essential, and because it's able to, of all of these things, really put together, keep us balanced and even. Not letting imbalances in metabolism, inflammation, cellular stability. It just helps keep us balanced. Is really
homeostatic,
that's exactly.
That's the word, isn't it? Like everything is about finding that balance, not, because I'm working in the immune sector sort of thing, and we don't want to be boosting our immune system as everybody talks about boosting, and I'm like, we don't want to boost. Our immune systems are already boosted. That's the problem. They're overactive most of the time, and they're too voracious, and we actually want to calm them down and modulate and get back to homeostasis and balance things out. And so it sounds like C15 is like just one of those things that fixes so many problems all in one go, that this is an essential fatty acid, and it's essential. It's essential. We need to get it in our diet, and as we said, we've got some problems with that, getting it in like we used to get it in. And so you've developed Fatty 15. So tell us a little bit about the story of developing the actual supplement, because this is a vegan supplement, isn't it? That's another cool thing for all the vegans out there that don't want to have fish oils or don't want to have anything animal. How did you do that? How did you make a vegan C15?
This was all in cooperation with the Navy, because I made this discovery while at the Navy. So this is really a U.S. Navy technology, and so and it was to help the dolphins, which is so wonderful. So the impetus behind it was to say, gosh, we can't find enough fish that reliably have enough C15 to really optimize, not just not have the dolphins be deficient, but to optimize C15 for their long-term health. And because we're realizing of all of these studies that we were doing were with pure C15, then it's saying, well, gosh, let's make this pure free fatty acid C15, one that's not attached to triacylglycerides like C15 in food is. Let's make it free fatty acid bioavailable. And while we're at it, let's make it vegan friendly too, because we can. And we really approach this more from a pharma perspective, Lisa, because when we were first working with it with the Navy, we were actually developing it as a potential treatment for fatty liver disease.
Wow.
So you don't really get an option in the pharma world to be like, let's extract it and have it be 65% pure and, and put butter in a capsule. It really needs to be a high quality, pure product. And so that's where we developed C15, where we take plant-based C14, which is readily abundant in plants and is used for a lot of things of pure C14. And we simply add a carbon. onto it. And that allows it, because the molecule is so simple, it only has one structure, that we're able to create this bioidentical C15, which is the same C15 that's used in all these studies that I've shared, throughout the podcast. So that when given the supplement of fatty 15, you're getting the exact molecule that was being used to show these efficacies in studies.
That's
which
important.
Which is why we feel better. It's very different than having a product that has a bunch of things in it from that might have complicated sources.
Yeah.
And then saying, well, here's this benefit in the study of it used alone. It may be very different when it's coming from a different type of source.
Totally get that, because again, going back to our story with one of the colostrum extracts and things, that the colostrum is not colostrum. Like, there's a billion types of colostrum, and what day was it collected, and what were the bioactive levels, and what were the immunoglobulins in it, and what were the et cetera, to get a standardized thing, and whether you can actually measure it in every batch is tested is really, really key. So getting the exact what was in the studies and the clinical research is just gold. And when you take, because I take fatty 15 and mum's on fatty 15, and it's a very small little pill, and you're like, when you're taking fish oils, you're like, oh, mate, a couple of grams a day, and it's quite, 3 or 4 big capsules. How is that tiny little bit as got as much in it as say 3 or 4 big capsules?
It's a good question. It's how our bodies have adapted for how much it needs of different fats to do its job. So it ends up for C15, like I'd mentioned, in milk fat,
only 1%.
Right. Only 1% of milk fat. And so when you go back in the day, right, we would normally, in the US, the average American would drink 2 cups of whole fat milk per day in the 1950s.
Wow.
And so that would be equal to about 200 milligrams of C15, and it would be in this triglyceride form. So that might be equal to 100 milligrams of free fatty acid. So, the versus the amount of omega-3s that we get from our diet are much higher levels. So our bodies only requires a much smaller amount. And that's where we even got to so specific as to, like we talked about in the cell membrane, if the cell has of all the different fatty acids in it, it needs more than 0.2% of those fatty acids needs to be C15. So we don't need a lot of it, but as soon as you get off that, below that level of 0.2%, it's amazing. The cells just become fragile and fall apart. It's this threshold where we need to get to. And then really cool hints coming from Sardinia, right? The longevity zone, where the most men live over 100 of anywhere in the world. And they have C15 levels. So most people today have C15 levels about 0.2. So right at that.
Right at the threshold. Yep.
So, and Sardinians have an average C15 level of 0.6.
Holy crap. That's like 3 times.
Holy crap.
Okay.
So they have 3 times higher levels of C15, and they don't take fatty 15, right? It's not, that's where we make fatty 15. And it ends up there. And there was a separate study done by True et al., and they showed that separate study, huge study with a lot of people, thousands of people, and they showed that people who had C15 levels between 0.4 and 0.6% had a lower risk of developing heart disease. So in Sardinia, people live longer. It has been attributed to they have a lower risk of dying from heart disease.
Wow.
So they are able to get their C15, very specialized region. They have hard cheeses on grass-fed sheep and goats in high altitude regions. It's just set up to be the perfect C15
setup.
Yeah, set up.
So if you're on Sardinia, you might not need it, but everywhere else in the world, you probably do.
And especially pecorino cheese plus fatty 15 is a good combo.
Wow. And I mean, there's nothing, wrong with doing some oral, taking some dairy, like some whole milk dairy, mix it in, like that's going to be a part of it. But, it's probably not going to cut the mustard. And as we said, we've got all the other fats and the other proteins and things that you might not want 10 liters of or something, per day to bring in. Okay, so heart disease is of course number one killer. And have you done any research specifically on cardiovascular disease or anything like the arteries and because this is another big thing, right? The stiffness of the arteries and inflammation in the arteries causing cardiovascular disease and stroke and clots and all of that sort of jazz. Any research there yet?
Yeah, there are a few good studies. We did studies on where we used diseases in a dish. So is this a panel called Biomap that's run by Eurofins, and they use this to assess different pharmaceuticals. And they use so it's basically human cell systems across 12 different disease systems, so to mimic different diseases in a dish. Some of those are cardiovascular diseases, and looking exactly, Lisa, at what you're talking about, which is inflammation in the vessels.
Yeah.
And what it showed was that reliably that C15 had a dose-dependent effect of significantly decreasing 18 different pro-inflammatory cytokines involved, and many of which are involved in cardiovascular disease. Wow. So that was really encouraging. And the effective levels were the same amount that we can get by taking 1 to 200 milligrams of C15 per day. So it's not like this crazy non-achievable active level. There are then studies that were then done in the lab repeatedly showing that C15 supplementation in relevant models decreased cholesterol. So we thought, okay, well, that's interesting. And then a controlled clinical trial just came out this year using pure C15 supplementation. This was at higher doses at 300 milligrams per day among women who were overweight and had fatty liver disease. They put them on a low-calorie diet plus so there was 3 groups: a low-calorie diet that followed the Mediterranean diet guidelines, and then the third group was low-calorie diet, Mediterranean diet plus C15 supplementation. That's a big lift, right? Yeah, because they all lost weight because they so the benefits that come with weight loss happen. Huge. But what they saw in addition to the group that had C15 supplementation is that it significantly decreased their LDL cholesterol. Wow. And they had the best decrease in liver fat and body fat, and also had improved gut microbiome, including improved growth of Bifidobacterium adolescentis, wow, which plays a role in balancing our metabolism and has even been shown to extend longevity. So that study showed some pretty encouraging results with regard to cardiovascular health, with regard to specifically LDL cholesterol, which is a whole nother conversation. Yeah, which is another,
and a major issue is oxidative LDL and particle sizes and all of that sort of jazz. So I mean, obviously lots more research that could be done there, because I think that would be really, really fascinating to see. And all of this is tied into the metabolic situation that you just see over and over and over again. People's cholesterol's going up, and blood pressure's going up, their arterial stiffness is going up, their cardiovascular risk factors are all going in the wrong direction. So this would be a good thing to be able to put into the mix. Does it help actually specifically increase weight loss or increase visceral fat around the organs? I'm thinking, just from a mechanistic point of view, I think it would.
It could. It had so it activates another one of its promiscuous.
Oh, PPAR alpha, yeah.
PPAR alpha and delta, and PPAR delta has been called a fat burner. Jeff Schwimmer's studies, his earlier studies, he showed that the higher the C15 levels that children had, the lower the amount of fat in their liver. And that study in Singapore, though it wasn't a significant p-value among these 3 different groups, showed that the people who had the C15 supplementation had the most decrease in body fat. And then in experimental studies, on which mice were fed a high-fat diet, those supplemented with C15 had less weight gain on a high-fat diet. So little pieces and parts, but Lisa, I wouldn't say from what
it's a weight loss
I would
pill.
not call it a weight loss supplement. It does. I think it definitely it improves the health of our metabolism, but would not put it first and foremost as a weight loss drug.
Gotcha. But it will probably add to that picture, you know. So is there anything else, Stephanie, that we've missed off in the latest research that we haven't covered? Anything that you wanted to share that I've missed sort of in the questioning?
I guess some people have brought up questions with regard to Ozempic and
Oh yeah.
with regard to nutritional deficiencies, right, that come with it. So Ozempic, obviously,
Exactly. Yeah, when you stop eating, you're not going to get because Ozempic, GLP-1 agonist, very commonly prescribed nowadays for weight loss, does amazing things, because great things in the cardiovascular in the brain and all that sort of jazz. But if you're not counseled correctly when you take Ozempic and you don't increase your protein and keep training and keep eating something, right? You can end up with nutritional deficiencies. Is that what you're getting at? And so,
exactly. It's just keeping an eye that as more and more people are going on Ozempic, being aware exactly what you said, Lisa, it is coming with many, many benefits. What we just need to be cautious with is our nutritional deficiencies. And so I know C15 being one of those to look out for. So that's just a question that's been come up. But I mean, the biggest take home point of this, you've covered so well, is just increasing awareness of there is a true C15 nutritional deficiency syndrome, the first to be discovered in 75 years. Present and we think at least 1 in 3 people, causes cellular fragility syndrome, sets us up for accelerated aging, and more metabolic heart, liver disease issues, and it's fixable. So excited to be working with leaders such as yourself which is
to
great.
get it out there. We've got to get it out there in the world.
And you can test for C15 levels because we get that question too.
Oh yeah, I saw that test come through, and I mean, I haven't done the test. So I don't know much about how the heck are you testing for it. Like, and is this an at-home test that we can do?
So no matter where you are in the world, chances are your doctor has access to a fatty acid panel. And more fatty acid panels are including C15. So this is not the one and only option. So that's a good way to test your C15 levels, and they report them in percentages. But we did we're partnered with Genova Diagnostics to come out with an at-home blood spot C15 test so that people can get it. And I believe I'll have to triple check, Lisa, but I believe that the fatty acid panel is available in New Zealand, and soon we were just told by Genova that it should be available, the at-home test as well. I just did mine. Cool. Got my results back a couple of days ago, and I'm at 0.42%. So
wow, brilliant. So you're going to live as long as the Sardinians. That sounds gold. I because you want to be able to see, right? I mean, not everybody needs to test, and maybe you should just take the thing if you're trying to prioritize resources, and because testing always costs money. But if you want to see a before and after snapshot, or if you want to see, am I deficient and do I need to take this, then this would be a great option. So yeah, I'll have a look into it and try to find out, if we can get it down here, or if you find out any more information for Kiwis and Aussies, that would be really, really great, because, being able to measure this sort of thing is absolutely gold.
Yeah, and it helps guide your journey, because if we've seen some vegans that have like 0.04%.
Yeah.
So it'll help guide your journey to say, well, maybe I take X amount for this amount of time, and then like, hey, I'm holding steady with 1 capsule a day, and this is great. So it really helps guide your journey. So you should never take more than you have to, even from an expense standpoint.
Yeah.
But you want to make sure that you're getting enough to get you up and over that.
So 1 a day is sort of what's on the bottle, but you can go up from there, 2 a day. Like if you've got someone who's struggling with some of these issues, would that be a good dosage, sort of going to 2 a day or even 3 a day?
Yeah, we recommend that people start with one, see how their journey goes, work with their physician, get your blood tests before and after of, LDL, of your cholesterol, liver enzymes, red blood cell panel, and then, and glucose, and then, check it in at 3 to 6 months.
Yeah.
See if you're feeling some of those near-term benefits. And then if it's not, if, you feel like you're not quite getting everything that you're hoping to get out of C15, to try taking 2 capsules a day. And see how that goes. We're now with the study from Singapore, I think with healthcare providers' guidance of being able to use up to 3 capsules a day, is now, as far as shown to be safe and effective.
Yeah.
But really, that's when you really want to be able to use the test, C15 test, and or a healthcare provider to help really guide whether or not you really need those levels.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. Dr. Stephanie, you've been absolutely fabulous today. Thank you so much for your precious time, because I know you're in demand all over the world with this research, because it's very, very exciting to the whole scientific community. So thank you so much for taking time out of your day. Really appreciate it. And we've gotten through without a medical emergency this time, which is fabulous. It's not like last time. I know. So I just want to thank you so much, and keep up this amazing work, and sharing. We'll get you back on if you have more updates and more published studies in future. And I'm, looking forward. And the guys at Fatty 15 have set me up. So I will put it down in the show notes. There's a code Lisa T that you can use. I've actually got a whole page set up there. You can get 15% off your subscription if you want to. And this is one of the, I heard you say too, you've got something like a 90% or something, 95% retention rate on your subscriptions, which is unheard of in the supplement industry. And that's because it works and because it's very effective. I mean, everybody in the supplement industry is jealous of that. Because that's a very powerful, you need to keep taking this, obviously. So it's something that to put into your regime. And it's prevention, and it's always hard to sell prevention, right? Because prevention is like, it's just not. So how do you quantify prevention? But I'm all about prevention as much as I can possibly be. I mean, I have everything known to man, that I've studied and looked at, so that I don't get caught out with something, because every time I still get caught out with something new. And it's just, as much as I can be prepared, I want to be prepared. It's like, preparing for the earthquake or the flood or whatever, be prepared instead of like reactive.
And we all want to live as long as possible, and most importantly, as healthy as long as possible. And at least I think
Amen.
more and more people are appreciating that and understanding that, let's find those little little ways that we can make a big difference. And exercise is a given.
Yeah, exercise, good diet, all that, but do this as well.
Things that now we can add in C15 too.
C15. Thank you, Stephanie. It's been absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much for your time today.
Great. Thank you, Lisa. It's wonderful being with you. Bye.